Dobrodošli u 159. Žiška podcast. Moje ime je Goran Jankuloski i danas smo pripremili za vas jedan poseban intervju. Ko nas iole prati, zna koliko volimo da čitamo knjige, a pogotovo poslovne knjige i nefikciju. Ko nas ne prati, neka pogleda bukvalno svaku pozadinu iza našeg thumbnaila, gde stoji gomiletina naših knjiga, pa je valjda isto jasno. Međutim, to nije jedina razlika u našoj epizodi danas i zato ću se ja sada prebaciti na engleski, ali ne ono što nas stalno prozivate kao da konstantno koristimo anglicizme, nego zato što naš današnji gost ne govori srpski. So, Chris Farmer is a fellow marketeer, in particular brand consultant in his agency Not a Pipe, but also a writer. You may know him from his previous book, Grumpy in Belgrade, his honest account of Serbian business culture, but he has written a new book, Living Brands. Living Brands is focused on his areas of expertise, building successful brands and managing them. So it would only make sense that he attends that preeminent marketing podcast in the region, as we were called by no one ever.
Vi slušate Žiška podcast.
So Chris, in short, why'd you write this book?
Well, my main idea was to be part of the preeminent podcast in the region.
I said nobody ever said we
Up
were.
until then.
Yeah.
I wrote the book, actually, I had the idea of writing the book several years ago. I only published it at the end of last year, but I'd been thinking about it for several years before. The idea was, because I've been teaching at university level, master's degrees, master's students in luxury brand management and other related subjects. And I find that the same questions kept coming up, the same kind of misunderstandings kept coming up about branding, about what is a brand, why does it work the way it works, what's the difference between a mass market brand or a regular brand and a luxury brand. People just didn't know. And when I say people, I'm talking about my students, so they're kids in their early 20s. And the idea came to me that I needed to put it all down because I kept saying the same things, I kept defining it in the same way, so I decided that I wanted to put it into a form where it was accessible, but I didn't want it to be an academic book. I didn't want it to be something like, that you assign to people. And, I would like it to, it's a reference for people who want to know more. And I've had a lot of feedback over the last few months since it was published exactly that. People who didn't know anything about brands before, who had never thought about branding before, were coming back to me and saying that they learned something, and I thought that was quite nice.
You've spent the last 20 years working within the branding industry.
Mm-hmm.
How far are branding professionals from your students?
Branding professionals today are probably not extremely far from my students. Unfortunately, the problem is that branding itself is, within the industry, it's misunderstood. And there are people who take it one direction, there are people who take it another direction. I approach it from the point of view that a brand is an identity, that it is an emotional response that you might have even to another human being. And that's the way I look at brands, and that you create an identity, a personality, characteristics, all of anything that you might consider to be a person would be. And that is, in the end, the brand. And you then hand that brand off to marketing professionals, to advertising professionals, to PR professionals, people who can talk about the brand, who can spread the news about the brand around. But the brand itself it comes before all that. It's not commercial. It's not a sales tool. It is what it is. It's an identity.
So what's a return on investment for a certain brand?
A return on investment would be wide knowledge of it, wide understanding of it. The biggest return on investment on the market today is Coca-Cola. It's McDonald's, it's Google, it's all of these brands that we know without thinking. Less return on investment, obviously, you get things like smaller brands that are, in America, for example, when we talk about Coca-Cola, you talk about an older brand of soda called RC Cola. Some people know it, like my mother, for example, it was her favorite.
I've heard of it in cartoons, yes.
Okay, you see. But it's not something that's universally known, and it's so the return on investment for RC Cola is not as high.
My point was we're constantly being pushed by CEOs or sales managers to produce a quantifiable metric for a brand.
Right.
And they want a return on investment like in terms of, well, if I put this much money into marketing, I'm going to sell this much and earn that much.
Well, that's where I push back. I don't think that is a feasible view of branding. Branding is not something that it goes by the numbers. You can't say, okay, now my brand is, I can't even imagine how to put it. If you say your brand is worth $60 billion, you're not talking about the worth of the brand. You're talking about the worth of how much was sold as a result of using the brand. That's true, but that's after the brand has already been created. That side of it is quantifiable, but what I'm talking about is what goes into making the brand, where the brand comes from originally. And there is hard to quantify because there is really, it's not about the numbers, it's more about the feelings. It's about how a brand engages us, how it touches us, how we feel about it. We need to love the brand, or we need to hate the brand, but we need to have some sort of strong reaction to it.
Can you explain on the example of how do you choose peas?
I use that, I talked about the peas in the book. I talked specifically about a brand, if I remember right, called the Jolly Green Giant. Jolly Green Giant was a brand of peas when I was growing up. And it's a huge, to us when I was a kid, this is a huge giant that's presiding over a field of vegetables and protecting them, the Jolly Green Giant. And the reason I use it in the book is because it's such a small and insignificant product, peas, So some people like them, some people hate them. There's not a lot of people who are in the middle. And but peas as a brand, as a product that was branded with the Jolly Green Giant, it became huge. I don't think I've had that brand of peas since the mid-'70s, right? Because it just doesn't exist in any place that I've lived, especially not here. But on the other hand, I remember it because it was branded in such a way that it became part of my life, right? So that pea, this tiny little green dot, is actually a much bigger part of my life than things that I put my hands on or see on my phone every day.
You have a different analogy that's maybe more structured for people. How do you choose shoes? Mm-hmm. Like you start with, I need some shoes, and then work your way down.
Right. Right. But this is something where I think this is one of the purposes of branding and brands in general, is that it helps you decide. You do it in sort of a heuristic way where you decide, okay, this is the kind of shoe I want. I'm looking for, if you love a brand, you've already stopped looking at every other brand except yours. You're looking at no other shoes except the ones that have a swoosh on it or the 3 stripes or whatever.
I think it's more generally people usually boil it down to 2. So I might be an Adidas or a Nike person, but I'm never going to be a Reebok person.
Right.
So I know that.
So you eliminate that whole side without even looking at it. That's true. And but look at it something different. Look at something that you don't really like. That makes it more of a challenge. Look at cameras, for example. The camera market doesn't really exist anymore today, but it used to be big, where you had many, many different brands, including Nikon, Pentax, Olympus, many others that I can't even remember right now. And if you looked at a camera shop, you might see 10, 15, 20 different brands. How do you choose? There's just no way to choose unless you have some prior knowledge of a brand. You say, okay, I've heard of Nikon. I've heard of people who use Nikon. I've seen the pictures that Annie Leibovitz takes for Vanity Fair, and she uses this camera for that. So already the brand is helping me make that decision in a field that I don't have prior knowledge of. If I go to buy shoes, I kind of know what kind of shoes I want. Like you, I'm within 2 or 3. I'll take this, or this. But usually not Reebok. Sorry, Reebok. Usually not Puma. It's all taste, right? If I'm looking for a car, and sometimes I've had to shop for cars. At the moment I don't drive, but I know that I will again. And I know the first car I'm going to look at is an Alfa Romeo because that's my brand. I love Alfa Romeo.
There are worse diseases,
and
yes.
They're not paying me to say that, I have to say.
I think one thing that people get confused about in terms of branding is that anything that has a logo is technically a brand.
Right.
But in order for you to actually be doing branding, you need to do a lot more.
Yeah. The way I like to look at it, and this is something I tried to lay out in the book as well at some point, is that the logo exists more or less as a signpost. It's one of those things that points in the direction of the brand. Say, if you see a swoosh, you say, over there where the swoosh is that's where the brand is. That's where Nike is. That's where McDonald's is. That's where Coca-Cola is. The logo points in that direction, but the brand itself is more like looking in a mirror. You know, when you look in a mirror, you see yourself, and you know the brand that you're looking at. You know all the stories of the brand because it's you. You know where they come from. You know what you've done. You know the friends. You know the the stories that you don't want to tell anybody. That's the stuff of the brand. The stuff of the brand is how the brand has evolved in the world, right? Now, I'm not saying that all brands have a huge, rich backstory. Sometimes it's made up. Ralph Lauren, as a backstory, is completely made up. Haagen-Dazs is completely made up. Doesn't make it less of a valid brand, because we think Haagen-Dazs is a Danish brand of ice cream, and it's great because the Danes live in a cold place, so it must be really good, right? I don't know why. But then you discover that in Danish they don't even have an umlaut, like they use in the Haagen-Dazs. It has a H-A umlaut and then another A, which doesn't exist also linguistically. So if you look at it too carefully, you're going to see that there are holes in it. Ralph Lauren was born Ralph Leibovitz, Lipschitz, and he lived in the Lower East Side of New York, and he came from a relatively humble background, not very much, they weren't a rich family. He wanted to make ties like one of his one of the actors he admired the most, Frederick March. And he made them, and he sold them on a little wooden box. He sold them outside Macy's department store. People started to like them. And then he started to get the idea to do more. And he grew, and he changed his name because he wanted to be more accessible to everybody. And his story is completely fabricated. But the brand is real.
You take this parallel that exists in storytelling, need versus desire. How do you apply that to brands?
But with brands, a lot of it is a lot about desire. It's a lot about dreaming. A need is something that doesn't necessarily provoke any kind of emotional response. You know, you need water to drink because you need water, otherwise you'll die. There are certain things that we need that we don't necessarily have, have feeling for, one way or the other. On the other hand, we need water, right? Everybody needs water, but we don't need, in particular, acquapana from Italy. We don't necessarily need Ferrarelle. We don't need Evian. All of those are desires. Evian adds that on top of it. Why do we want Evian? Evian because it looks fresh and it's from the mountains and it's from, a source that inspires us. We feel something about it. That's the brand. That's the desire. That's not the need. The need is only the water. We don't need that. The need is pedestrian, whereas the desire is the dream. There was a CEO of BMW, I can't remember his name, a few years ago. He said that his job was to make sure that every young boy went to bed every night and dreamed of having a BMW.
Okay, if desire is that important, then how do we create a desire?
Interesting. I wonder if you create a desire, actually. I think that desire is something that gets evoked more than created. It's something that you pull out of people, that they don't really understand. They don't know that they want it, or they don't know that they desire it. We show them how something can be desirable, right? So if you have a brand and you put it into a context which is desirable to a certain target market, that will obviously increase their want. They'll want to have it. But that's more, I don't know. For me, that would be more of a manipulation as opposed to a creation of a real brand. I mean, if you're creating a real brand, the bottom line premise has to be that people want it, that it's fulfilling a desire that people already have, right? It's not coming out of nowhere. A brand doesn't spring out of zero. Otherwise, it just will fail. A lot of brands do fail, as a matter of fact. When you think about, probably 1 out of 50 make it to the public eye in one way or another, because the other ones don't connect with the human being that wants to take it, that wants the product, that wants the brand. It doesn't make that connection.
But you do introduce a hierarchy of needs, desires, and dreams. Use the example of Aston Martin going down to Alfa Romeo, going down to a Hyundai.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now I'm trying to remember I did that.
You say that I buy a Hyundai because it's cheap enough for me to afford it.
Right.
I want to drive a BMW, an Alfa Romeo, but I dream of driving an Aston Martin.
Well, I mean, and this is a series of compromises that we have to make that sort of correspond with the economic reality of the world. I teach luxury branding, and there is probably nothing in my syllabus that I can buy for myself. I would love to drive an Aston Martin. Actually, I'm not sure I would love to drive. I would love to drive a Maserati, let's say. I am not likely to. I love Alfa Romeo. Alfa Romeo is more accessible to me. It's a little bit beyond my reach, but enough that if I save for it, I can do it. But if I really need to drive, yes, it's going to be a Fiat. It's going to be a Hyundai. It's going to be we make compromises. It doesn't mean that it doesn't diminish the brand that we love the most.
And it also says that all those brands are basically referential to one another. You're never creating in a vacuum.
No. If you are making choices, you're always going to find things that resonate, that correspond with what you love about the brand. The Alfa Romeo, for me, if I had to name one thing, I would say that it's the shape of the car, the way that the body of the car is shaped, right? And that can be seen in many different brands, if you really look for it. Not exactly the same, but echoes of it, resonance. How does the motor work? How many cylinders does it have? What's the twin spark thing? I don't have any idea. I really don't know, and that's not important to me. It reminds me of another thing, right? With mobile phones, everyone has a mobile phone. Most of the world, I would say, has an Android phone. And then there are a certain percentage, I'm not sure what the numbers are, of Apples. Apple is the only brand that exists. The iPhone is the only brand that exists. It's the only one that we say, I want that. And you don't ask yourself about the processor, and you don't ask yourself how many pixels the camera has, right? If you're going to buy an Android, you know everything because you want to compare, okay, this one has 65 bazillion pixels. I don't even know the numbers of how that works. This one has a faster processor. This one has a bigger camera. This has a bigger interface. And you know the detail. With Apple, it's like, oh, yeah, that's my brand. I want that brand.
Yeah, but in Serbia, you need to take into account Xiaomi, which is
Xiaomi,
turned into a brand.
It's becoming a brand. That's true. You're right. It's becoming a brand, but still, it's not reached the level of iPhone. iPhone began as a brand.
Yeah, but this is like, it's ironic because it's a Chinese brand.
Yeah.
But it became one of the Serbian brands. Like, Serbs love odnos cene I kvaliteta. That's like, that's what we dream of.
But Xiaomi was the cheap brand. Xiaomi was the affordable brand. It was selling in China on the first year. I wanted to buy one, actually, but there was a waiting list. I didn't get on. I think the first one you could buy for 100 euros. Or maybe even less. With the same functionality as your standard Samsung Galaxy or similar phone. Yeah, it wants to be a brand. It's not yet a brand, though. It's not because all it's doing is competing better on the functionality and the price ratio. It's competing better than other brands, but it's not showing itself to have any particular values as a brand. If that makes any sense. I don't know if I'm making... The point is that iPhone stands for something. When you say that I want to buy an iPhone, it says something about you. If I say I want to buy a Xiaomi, I say to myself, okay, it could say that I'm a Sinophile, that I love everything from China. Or it could say that I just can't afford the other ones.
Yeah,
that wouldn't
in
be a brand
Serbia,
value.
I think they've successfully created an image that you can co-opt into. That you're a savvy person. You don't give your money for trinkets.
Okay.
Like, I think that's a local thing, but
fair enough. It's
tell me
thrift, what we would call it. It's the idea of as thrift as a value.
Yeah. Do you ever use the brand archetype wheel? You know, the sage, everyman, and etc. All the brand archetypes, like there's 12 of them. They're usually in a circle.
Oh, actually, I have seen it and I have thought about it, but I haven't really. This is something that it was never something that I took a lot away from. I don't know, it's just a personal opinion. For me, I didn't want to. When I'm thinking about brands, I think you need to think about it. I don't like to think about it in particular models like that because the models themselves inform our way of thinking about a brand, if that makes sense. That we actually invest a lot in what we think the models on the wheel might mean, and then we try to force it doesn't always work. There's another
thing about it. The original creators, there's a book somewhere behind you. The original creators never meant for people to do what they usually do, and that is, you're gonna be 30% creator and 40% sage.
Yeah.
And the whole point of theirs was you can only be one thing, and you only need to be one thing for eternity.
You only need to be one thing, and it doesn't matter if you have an extra % of sage or 1% less of whatever else. I don't know. There's a tool that I do use, which I find that's interesting. It's the identity prism, and that's done by, I believe, Bernard Dubois. And that's where you use 6 different areas to describe and create the personality or the substance of a brand. So you begin with physique, which is sort of what it is, its physical appearance. If it's Nike, it's shoes, it's sportswear, it's accessories, that sort of thing. But then you have the one that's next to it, which is personality. If this brand were a person, what would its personality be? It would be competitive, for example. It would be driven. It would be ambitious, maybe, something like that. Then you go from there to its culture. Where does the brand come from? And that doesn't mean only the country, but also where does it come from in terms of where did it come from in terms of its sort of general background? Nike comes from Phil Knight, who was an athlete, and so its culture is him. But it's also the northwest of the U.S. because that's where he was working at the time. Hermès, the French luxury brand, comes from saddle making. That's its culture. Today it has nothing to do with saddle making, but they still have leather, and they still are interested in craftsmanship. So the personality, the culture of that brand, and it says a lot about it. And as you create all of the different 6 boxes around the identity prism, eventually a view of what the brand is, if it were a person, it gels together, and it becomes this 60% of 30% of a thing, without looking at the numbers, because it's just a matter of looking at how that brand appears to other people.
There seems to be a great tension between creating brands and managing them. Would you agree?
Absolutely, because a brand manager generally would like to make it work with their ideas of, you know, where a brand might fit in the funnel, or where it might, or tailor it to a different target audience that it wasn't created for. But from one point of view, it's like that. Another point of view, you have a lot of brands that are created by marketing people to begin with, and they're sort of brand managed brands from the beginning. Procter & Gamble does that. They go out, they research, they ask people, they do questionnaires, they do surveys, and they find out, okay, the world would like to have a small metal box that contains this and this product, and it has to be blue, and it has to be big enough to fit on the shelf in the bathroom. Take that, send that to manufacturing, they make it, the market is already ready for it. So the brand is made according to a defined market. That the brand manager doesn't fight with. The brand manager will fight with a brand that comes from a visionary, from a creator, from someone who's making a brand from their own spirit. That's very, very much the case in, for example, designer clothing, or in certain kinds of automobiles, watches, luxury brands.
Well, we mentioned Apple. Steve Jobs was famous for ignoring everybody's advice, including the target group, the focus groups.
That's true.
And running with what he saw as...
And he was mostly right. They made some awful mistakes at Apple over the years. I mean, they made some very, very big mistakes by following what Steve Jobs thought the market should be doing. But that's got to be understandable. I would more err on his side, though, and say that the creator's vision should have more weight, right? Because in a way, the person who's creating the brand is like an artist, and the artist is actually telling us what we should think about the art. They're interpreting it in a way. They're interpreting it for us, and if we don't agree, or we don't like it, or we don't follow, then it's not going to become our brand eventually, and that's, you know, normal. But the idea is that many people will go that way, and many people will understand and feel it inside, and then you get people who become the followers and loyal followers of a brand.
The second tension that happens with managing brands, even a well-intentioned brand manager, the one that really digs into the customer profile, the brand profile you're making, still needs to be consistent throughout time, and that seems to be really hard. You use the example of LS in the book to explain.
Yes. But yes, LS was a brand that has had a very sort of checkered background. It has really came from a sort of a nobility of brands. It was one of the first sportswear brands. in Italy in the 50s, I believe it was 1956, if I'm not wrong, but don't quote me on it. And Ellesse became a luxury brand in sportswear. It meant something. It was for a certain class of people in Italy, the ones who played tennis in the summer and went skiing in the winter, which not everybody could do back in the day. And that carried on up and up and up through the 70s into the 80s. Some people will probably remember or associate Ellesse with some of the greatest tennis players that there were. Becker was wearing Ellesse, Martina Navratilova was wearing it, Chrissy Evert was wearing it. I mean, these are big names from the 70s and early 80s. But still, that was where they were. They sponsored the New York Marathon. Everybody was wearing for 1 year Ellesse sneakers in the marathon, even though Ellesse didn't make running shoes. That was a disaster. But something happened at one point where the marketing department and the sales department decided that it's better to make more money selling more units, and that they should dumb down the brand, that they should make it more mass market. So you ended up with a lot more T-shirts with big Ellesse across the chest, with big logo sweats, and the prices went down. The popularity went up around the world until the point where people said, okay, that's enough.
And this is around about the time that people here start hearing about Ellesse. It's the time of the sweatshirt with the huge logo, and also the brown shoes from the 90s that we all remember.
Right.
So for us in Serbia at that time, it was still very premium.
But that time was still premium. I mean, that time was like, thinking it was 93, 94, 95. It was still a good time for the brand, and it was still, the brand was hugely popular in the UK, in France, in Italy, its home country, not as much. It had already lost a little ground in Italy. But here, in the former Yugoslavia, it was the biggest market, the fifth biggest market, I should say, in the world, which is saying something, because this is not it's not an insignificant amount of money we're talking about, and people would buy it. They buy the most expensive pieces and the least expensive pieces. So it was not even a matter of money. It was a matter of people wanting the brand. I had a licensee in South Africa, and people loved the brand so much in South Africa that they just wanted everything Ellesse. And so my licensee made everything Ellesse, and he made jeans. We never had jeans. He made this, he made that, and the other thing. And I had to actually go down and say, you can't do this, because he completely diluted the market, and now it's lost. South Africa's lost to Ellesse because he overblew it. What happened is that after the big logo phenomenon, which wasn't in the mid-90s, it was near the end of the 90s. It was actually the beginning of 2000s. The brand started to go down because its value was less, because everybody had it. It was too available, and it was boring, and they were looking for something different.
The value was less and less.
I walked right into that one, didn't I?
Yeah, you talk so lovely. Like I needed to puncture the conversation a little bit.
Oh man, for the years that I worked for them, and since then I've not heard that one yet. So well done.
Okay, let's switch gears from like the operational side of branding. Mm-hmm. Your book is, I believe, I don't know if it's called. This is called the blurb, right?
Yeah.
So the blurb starts saying, branding is a serious business that we take far too seriously.
Right.
What do you mean by that? Sounds
like a quote from me.
Yeah.
Branding is, when I say it's a serious business we take seriously, it is a serious business. It is significant. It means something. We need it. Right? Branding is how we identify ourselves and things around us in the world, what we like, what we don't like. And we have to take that seriously. On the other hand, I think that the business of branding and the business of communications in general is something that we do take too seriously. You know, there's too much marketing speak. There's too much, you know, playing one against the other. The idea of all that's happened in the news in the past few days regarding Balenciaga, for example. Some of it was real. A lot of it was brewed up in the marketing department of Balenciaga itself, in the media. A lot of what we're supposed to feel about this is manufactured. And that's what I think where we take it too seriously. What we need to take seriously is deciding what the brand is. Okay, so I say to myself, what is Balenciaga? Part of what Balenciaga is today is a result of what we saw them do. So everyone's opinion who's paying attention probably is somewhat changed. Might be good, might be bad, might be a lot of it probably they're afraid it's going to go very bad, but I don't think everyone. But that's how we feel about it. That's why branding is important. It's how we feel about it. Dolce & Gabbana got kicked out of China in 2019 because of their insensitive, awful advertising campaign. I'm not sure if you knew anything about it. I
think I remember.
They had three advertisements where they had a Chinese woman in the restaurant trying to eat Italian food, and they were making fun of her because she was trying to eat a cannoli, you know, the big sweet thing, with chopsticks, and she couldn't pick it up. She was trying to eat spaghetti with chopsticks. Now, what Dolce & Gabbana didn't quite understand is that, yes, they eat noodles all the time with chopsticks, so there's nothing funny there at all. But the Chinese, as many people in China, were offended by it. And they had their catwalk show was canceled. They were not allowed to be in the stores. That collection for that season was not bought by any retail store. And, you know, this is where they just went completely wrong. And the feeling that the Chinese today have about Dolce & Gabbana is not recovered. So that's why it's a serious business. You have to you're out there. You can't please everybody, right? But you have to realize that a brand does things like a person and gets reactions like a person. But I don't think, just to come back to your point about, you know, how we take it too seriously, I think we take the mechanics of it too seriously. The feeling is instinctual. If I have an instinctually bad feeling about a brand, I want to ask myself why. What's causing that, right? But I don't need to run a focus group, and I don't need to see, you know, I don't need to sit around in a conference room with the brand managers and talking about the ins and outs of what possibly it could be, right?
But how do you ensure that you're getting as many points of feedback as you can? Like, you have a certain vision in your mind what a brand is. For example, let's get back to Balenciaga. There's something for you. For me, now they're inextricably linked with MC Stoyan chopping up his Balenciagas, which he did on TikTok.
Yes.
So the whole thing is now, for me, just another farce. But we have different views, and MC Stoyan has a third view, and all the people who commented below have their own views. Like, how do you reconcile all those viewpoints?
Okay. Well, what I was talking about before is more like what is in the conception of the brand itself. I wasn't talking about the brand as a business. The business side of Balenciaga and the sales and marketing sides of Balenciaga probably want to shoot themselves today because it's gone out of control. It's almost out of their hands. They really have to work hard to come back, and I really don't see how they're going to do it. And I don't think you can reconcile the two very well. I mean, the business side of it is what it is, and you do have to analyze that. But what I disagree with is where you're looking at the identity of a brand and say what the brand essentially is. I don't think what Balenciaga did was in keeping with their own brand identity. Right? And that's why I think Balenciaga will overcome this as a brand.
Because they're a troublemaker.
Because they are a troublemaker. And we're going to regard this 2 or 3 years from now as a blip. Maybe. I could be wrong, but I think so. Because the identity is not disturbed that much. A little bit it's disturbed. You can't have, for example, an advertisement or an image of Chanel, You can't see a picture of Audrey Hepburn, for example, knee-deep in the mud, I was about to say something really awful. I'm going to refrain myself. But, there are things that a brand can do and there are things that a brand cannot do. You can't take away the elegance of Chanel. You can't add elegance to Diesel, for example. Diesel is a provocative brand. It's like Balenciaga wants to be, actually. And I think one of my favorite advertising campaigns for Diesel, because it was so much the value of the brand, was be stupid. Okay, not a good message for my kids, right? But on the other side,
Smart has the cash or something, and stupid has the stories.
Yes. Oh, there were lots of them. It was just really good. It was a good campaign.
Your previous book was called Grumpy in Belgrade, and this book seems to have nothing to do with the previous book. But then again, the grumpy old Chris sometimes chimes in through this book, and I see that in moments when you pick fights with holy cows of advertising. And I have a list of some of them here. Okay. And the first one for me that's fun is you hate the word content.
Yeah. Content reminds me of a market, Content reminds me of a burlap bag that's full of potatoes. That's content. It doesn't matter what's in the bag. It's just a bunch of stuff. I don't like the word content. It gets used so much today by professionals and non-professionals as well. We talk about content. What's the content of that website? No, it's not. The content of the website, what's written there? What are the words? Words mean something. The words are important. The images are important. It's not just generic content. I can't remember what the film was. I think it was Annie Hall, Woody Allen, when the guy comes into the room and he looks at he looks at the wall and he says, "I need some art there, and I want it to be brown. Can we have brown?" That's content. Not caring about what it is.
It's
the space it takes up.
Evolve from first the media agency comes and they say you need 3 posts per week, or a SEO agency comes and they say you need 3 blog posts per month, and then you turn that into a challenge of how to fill up that box with potatoes stuff. Or content. What do we say?
With stuff. You just got to fill it full of stuff.
You mentioned websites. While the whole industry is talking about e-commerce, you see websites as first and foremost the storytelling tool.
Yes, I do. E-commerce is the way of the future. There's no doubt of it. I mean, if you look at the Chinese market, it's already better than 60% of retail is in e-commerce. And of that, more than half of it is mobile e-commerce. I mean, it's what's going to happen. But we have the website is a wonderful thing. It's something that we don't use enough to take advantage of the storytelling, because it's the only place where the brand is alone. Nike is it's the only brand present in this, and you have all of the real estate. When you're talking about web design, you're often talking about the real estate of the different pages. And all of the real estate is devoted to that brand. And you should make every use of it, right? And if you're just there to sell product, then you're a shop. Then you're not a brand site. And that's why I think that the website should be really that place for creating the world, the universe of that brand, allowing people to come into it. And then, of course, naturally they're going to want to buy because now they're part of it.
Yeah, I think that what gets lost in translation, when I compare, for example, there's another Serbian podcast called Business Priče, And there's an excellent episode from the guy from militaryshop.rs. And he starts talking about how advertising is dead and how branding is useless. Essentially, I mean, his point is that he has his conversion campaigns and no agency can beat his cost per click results. But the thing that he misses is that militaryshop.rs is not the brand. The brands that he's selling inside are the brands.
Exactly.
And there's, I forgot, he uses an excellent example of one, it's a two-parter, I forgot, but the brand of knives. And the brand of knives that are specially crafted knives, and they have this awesome name, etc. He talks about that at length. But this is where people get lost all the time when we switch between marketing and advertising, between brands and sales. Like, it's easy to slip between those categories.
Yeah, and it's easy to lose perspective on if you can't say that brands are not important when your whole success is piggybacked on the fact of having a good brand. Ironically, and you talk about it, right? And I think, that happens in a lot of places. Decathlon. Decathlon has its own brand now, I shouldn't say. But for years, they were only other people's brands. And other people's brands sold really well at Decathlon because they were the biggest sports shop in France. They were in every tiny little city. Today, building on that, actually, this is an interesting story because building on that, they developed this brand of their own, Quechua. They saw how the other ones were performing. They saw what the other people loved about the other brands, and they took it for themselves. And they made a really good brand, this Quechua. It'll never have the prestige of the other brands that they sold, but it has all of the features of it.
I'm absolutely sure that all our viewers and listeners right now are floored by the way it's pronounced.
How do you pronounce it?
Quixo. Yeah, I do this every 20 minutes,
Quixo.
Okay, the next holy cow. Whenever we talk about brands, especially when we talk about them in groups, there are brand managers, there are some strategists, creatives, and marketing directors, and there's lots of people there. And usually we just start adding on more stuff to a brand. But you say a brand needs to be as reductive as possible. You use the example of Birkenstock, which I don't know what it is.
Birkenstock is, but they're sold here. Office Shoes sells them. They're a German brand of outdoor shoes that are molded to your foot, and they're mostly sandals, and they're mostly used by. They used to be more of a hippie kind of shoes. Now they're more mainstream.
I think that this is the cultural divide. There exists a very similar sandal. But Grubin. Grubin
is, with respect, Grubin is a copy of them. And these
we didn't know the original existed, so we love our copy thing.
Okay. There's a story by Borges about that, but it's called Pierre Menard, author of Don Quixote. And he is the person, Pierre Menard, actually writes Don Quixote, word for word, but he never saw the original. It just occurred to him. So Birkenstocks is interesting because it's gone over so many different transformations over the years, and it's been done in a way that Birkenstocks remains really true to itself, and it's true that people add on new things to it. Like in a few years ago, people were wearing Birkenstocks in fashion shows and in catwalks, but in the 1800s or whenever it was that they originally were created, they were orthopedic shoes. They were made for people to work and not hurt their feet. In the 60s, they became the all-earth kind of hippie type shoe, and it's whatever happened to that. It was about 10, 15 years. they disappeared a little bit, and then they came back with the hipsters, and then they came back again with high fashion. So every time they were coming back as themselves. People didn't actually change the brand at all. They just put it in front of different people. And I think that I would call a successful management of the brand, because they were able to keep the brand and they used the brand for everything it was worth, but put it in front of a different target audience and show them how it could be as valuable to them.
But you also say that you need to allow room for interpretation in any brand. And you use the example of Jean-Paul Sartre and the brand Hennessy.
Right. But Sartre looks at it, and his whole premise of existentialism and the philosophy of existentialism is that a thing has a value in and of itself, and not more and not less. But how we interpret it and who gets to use it is a matter of, it's outside the hands of the brand. So what I was saying is that Hennessy, cognac, very traditional, staunchly traditional, probably one of the most traditional French brands, couldn't have been happy. They probably were killing themselves when they were watching how it was taken over by American rappers. You know, this was in the 90s, and if you listen to rap from the 90s, you'll see that every third one mentions Hennessy.
It's easy to rhyme.
Yeah, the Humpty Dance. Do you remember that one? I'll drink up all the Hennessy you got on your shelf. And it just goes on like that, and it's from a point of view of the brand. Yeah, that's going way, way, way outside the purview of what people thought was Hennessy cognac. It's for old people. It's for respectable people. It's for people with a lot of money, right? Okay, some of these rappers did have a lot of money. That's fine, but. The point that I was making with the reference to Sartre was that in and of itself, the Hennessy brought the same value to Snoop Dogg and to whoever was drinking it as they brought to, you know, François de Martin Près de Fouchecourt. That's the guy.
Ja, tebi.
But it's interesting because it's a little bit philosophical, and I enjoy that side of it because it's also, for example, if you think about the idea of what Plato thought about the image of what we have on the earth of anything material, even ourselves, is a reflection of the ideal, and the brand, in a way, is our attempt to make that ideal even as best as we can.
Well, it flows nicely into the name of your agency, Not a Pipe.
Yeah.
Similar.
This is not a pipe. The name of that painting by René Magritte, a Belgian surrealist, is the treachery of images. And all he was saying, he wasn't even saying anything complicated when he made it. I remember reading about what his reaction was. He said he was actually surprised when he wrote "Ceci n'est pas une pipe," which is "This is not a pipe," and it's a picture of a pipe. And people said, "Why'd you do that?" Because it's not a pipe; it's a picture. I painted this. You can't smoke it. And what I like about that, and I love Magritte anyway, because the whole idea of his work challenges how we think about everything. And with "This is not a pipe," making that the image of my company was saying that yes, I work with brands, and as someone who works with brands, as someone who creates brands, I'm the one who can tell you what it means. And I'll show you why. And the other thing is, and this is sort of on the other side of it, is I used to smoke a pipe, but it wasn't a real pipe, it was an electronic pipe. It was an e-pipe. So, ceci n'était pas une pipe non plus. a lot of the time when I'm having meetings with clients, I spend a lot of time talking about the name of the company, which I like. It's good because it provokes discussion.
Yeah, it's similar for us when, like you called Žiška, and then usually those conversations take place in Serbian, so it's a lot easier to explain why a creative agency should have that name. But a good conversation starter is always good. You use a lot of examples of luxury brands. Now, do you use them because of your expertise as a professor of luxury brands, or because luxury brands are the top of branding, like those are the best defined brands that exist in the market?
I'm tempted to just say yes and leave it at that. But yes, the fact is I'm very familiar with luxury brands, and I'm familiar, and I become more and more familiar as we go ahead. However, I do agree with the way you put it. Luxury brands are, in a way, the pure state of where brands are, because you're not trying to sell anything at all. You're trying to present a world. You're trying to present a dream. There's a very big sense in which you shouldn't sell luxury brands, because as soon as you sell it, the dream dies. As soon as it's sitting in the hands of a consumer, there's no more dream. You've got it, right? If it's a Patek Philippe or if it's a Mont Blanc pen or something like that, as soon as you hold it in your hand, you don't dream about it anymore. And the idea of luxury brands is all about that dream. It's all about fostering that desire that people have to own or to be part of that world. They might not even have to own it. One of the things is also that, the luxury brands are the top 1% of the top 1% of people who own them. As I said myself, I would love to, but I'm not someone who owns luxury brands. I have a Mont Blanc pen. It was a gift. Okay, I should, but I don't have any because I'm not part of that world. But I want to learn about it. I want to know about it, and the brands give me access to it.
The reason also why I'm asking is because Konstantin Savic actually posed you a question. What are the best books to learn about luxury branding in 2022? In 2022?
Actually, I would probably refer you away from 2022. I think that one of the biggest and one of the most important thinkers in luxury branding today is Jean-Noël Cap-Ferrer. He is a professor at HEC University in France. That's one of the grandes écoles.
I think you will have to
commercial schools.
Do the Goodreads link after.
I will. He's someone who thinks very, very clearly about branding, and not just luxury branding in general. He also wrote a book called The New Strategic Brand Management, which doesn't only deal with luxury brands, but in terms of luxury, he's the guy, right? There's another one called Moïse Chevalier, who wrote The Luxury Strategy. Also interesting, but I would say that between the two of them, they are the standard today. People continue to talk about luxury brands, and there are things that are worth reading, and there are things that are less worth reading. The reason I'm not saying any other ones is because most of them are derived from there. On the other hand, next year I will have published another book on sustainable luxury, which you should look out for, which in the introduction to, I say this is the last book you should ever read about sustainable luxury.
Okay, so the podcast guests solve themselves for next year. Okay, so someone is listening to our conversation, and they're full of ideas now. They know everything they need to do.
Great.
And they're ready to march into the board meeting and tell them everything they need to know and what they're doing wrong. But then in the book you say, I don't recommend you doing this. Why?
Well, the fact is this: the guy who's going to do that and walk into the board meeting with a head full of steam and a great brand in his mind is going to be torn to pieces unfortunately, because the business side is so important. You can't ignore it. You have to. In fact, for me, the most important operation is separating the creative brand, the brand creation on the one side, and the brand promotion or sales or marketing on the other side, because this is very much an economic process, right? And you are always going to be, as a creative, you're always going to be besieged by people like that who want to quantify you, as we talked about before, to find ways to monetize a brand, which is their job. It's not the creator's job. The brand creator will not be able to step into their shoes unless he happens to be trained in that. I think that's probably the key distinction to be made. I think that when you're looking at a brand, and I think this happens all the time, people look at a brand as a potential for making money. But a good brand, or even a great brand, I would say, is probably not made for that purpose. It's made for the purpose of getting someone to love it. How it gets sold and how much money they're going to make is up to somebody else. Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola was not made as a brand of anything. Coca-Cola was made as a medicine to save Pembroke, I believe his name was, from his addiction to morphine. And so he made this drink with cola in it, with the caffeine and with a little bit of cocaine in it. And that became a sort of a medicinal drink. As people began to drink it with him, it became more and more popular, and all of a sudden it became something, hey, we can make money off this. By 1905, they had to take the cocaine out. And in 2022, they're not selling anything. They're not selling sugar and water and flavors anymore. They're selling love and belonging and happiness and togetherness. That's Coca-Cola. Right? But it's making bazillions of dollars on the other side. It's they're not irreconcilable, but they can't sit together very well.
Is that the reason why many great brands were started by the CEOs themselves, while not so many great brands were made by marketing directors? That
would sound very disparaging to marketing directors, and I hope that I don't insult anyone by saying, yeah. The brand is made by a visionary. Anybody who has a vision, he might be a marketing director. He might be a janitor. It might be me and you. It might be anybody, someone who has a vision of what they want something to become. Like my book, it's a brand all by itself. It's a brand that I made, okay? And it's something I made because I had a feeling that I wanted to communicate with other people. I wanted them to connect emotionally and intellectually with some of the things that I was saying. I created that brand. It's a small brand compared to the ones that we've been talking about today, but nevertheless.
Okay, now that you mentioned the book, it's a good outro for the episode. Can you tell people how they can get their hands on one of?
Sure. The Living Brands in Belgrade is available in a number of bookshops. Delphi, Vulcan. I can't remember what other ones. Anywhere usually. I think you can get it in most bookshops actually, where the English language books are sold. Or you can get it directly from Komše, the publisher, in their website. They have a direct order, and they ship it directly to you at home.
Okay. Can I switch back to Serbian now, to the outro?
Samo izvojte.
Thank you. Vi ako ste došli do ovde, ovo je bukvalno kao kad dođeš kući, pa obučeš trenerku posle posla. Ako ste došli do ovde, onda vam se svidela naša priča i možete nas zapratiti na našem YouTube kanalu ili na bilo kojoj audio platformi. Imamo Spotify, Apple, to jest Apple podcast, Imamo i RSS feed koji možete da uvučete u svoj podcatcher. A takođe možete i da prođete kroz naše stare epizode i proberete jednostavno stvari koje vas zanimaju. Ako vas zanimaju brend strategije, imate epizodu 151 sa Verom Lloyd Thomas koja priča prvenstveno marketing strategije, ali dokačimo se i brend strategije. A ako vas zanimaju generalno knjige, poslovne knjige, imate epizodu 125 sa Minićem za ne baš jednostavan, ali veoma dobar čovek, ili Medvede na putu sa Bojanom Lekovićem. Želim vam do slušanja, jer podcaste niko živ ne gleda. Ako niste primetili, ja sam kašljao negde tokom ove epizode, tako da sam veoma ponosan što sam uopšte preživeo ovu epizodu i sada mogu da nađem neku drugu osobu da pripremi neku narednu temu.
Vi slušate Žiška podcast.